Your mom yelled, "You're a parasite, you only come here to take advantage of us." Then she told me to leave if I had any dignity, so I left without a word. 2 weeks later, my dad called me desperate. Why wasn't the business loan renewed? I simply replied, "I thought you were taking advantage of me." And I watched as they lost everything I had silently sustained. The smell of freshly brewed coffee floated in the air when I entered the kitchen that Thursday morning. My mother, Maria, was facing away from me, chopping fruit with more force than necessary. The sound of the knife against the cutting board marked the rhythm of a tension that had been building for weeks. "Good morning," I murmured as I poured myself a cup of coffee. My mother barely grunted in response. Since I had returned home 3 months ago, after the company I worked for unexpectedly went bankrupt, every interaction had become a minefield. "Did Dad already leave for the business?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "Yes, someone has to work to keep this house running," she replied without looking at me, with that tone she reserved exclusively for me. I took a deep breath. What my mother didn't know, what I had decided not to tell her, was that every night, after everyone went to bed, I stayed up until dawn reviewing the accounts of the family business, a small hardware store that had been on the verge of bankruptcy for the last year. She didn't know it was me who had silently renegotiated the loans, who had modernized the inventory system, who had contacted more economical suppliers. Dinner that night was particularly tense. My father, Gabriel, a man who had always preferred peace over justice, ate in silence while my mother made comments about people who don't contribute anything and family burdens. It all exploded when, after finishing eating, I left my plate in the sink. "Are you going to leave it there? Do you expect your mother to wash it for you?" she snapped. I was going to wash all the dishes when I finished, of course. Like always, excuses, she interrupted me, her voice rising several tones. 30 years old, and you're still living like a teenager, no job, no responsibilities. Mom, you know I'm looking for a job. The situation is difficult. The situation is difficult for everyone, but only you think you can come here, eat our food, use our electricity, all for free. You do nothing all day. I wanted to explain that I spent my mornings sending resumes and my nights saving the business that my father was mismanaging, but she didn't give me a chance. "You're a parasite, you only come here to take advantage of us." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at my father, hoping he would say something, defend me, at least moderate the situation, but as always, he looked down at his empty plate. "If you have any dignity," my mother continued, trembling with rage, "you should leave this house and leave us in peace." At that moment, something broke inside me. I remembered all the sleepless nights, the headaches trying to fix my father's financial disasters, the pleading calls to the banks to extend the payment deadlines. I remembered how I had turned down a job offer in another city to stay close and be able to help them. Without a word, I got up from the table, went up to my room, and packed the essentials in a suitcase. As I did so, I heard my parents arguing downstairs, my mother's voice still furious, my father's pleading but weak, as always. When I came down with my suitcase, my father was at the bottom of the stairs. "Son, you don't have to go," he said softly. "Your mother is upset, but she'll get over it." I looked him in the eyes for a long moment. This man, who had never been able to defend me, who preferred momentary peace to necessary confrontation, who depended on me much more than he would ever admit. "Goodbye, Dad," was all I said before walking out the door without looking back. The small apartment I rented was barely a studio with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom that looked like a closet, but it was mine, paid for with the savings I had been putting away to someday have my own business. Pure irony, those savings had survived because I didn't invest them in the family business when my father asked me to a year ago. During the first week, I checked my phone constantly. No calls from my parents, no messages asking if I was okay. The silence confirmed what I had always suspected. For my mother, I was a nuisance. For my father, a dispensable resource. It was Friday night when I remembered that the main business loan was due in 2 weeks. Normally, I would schedule a meeting with the bank manager, an old friend from college, to renegotiate the terms. My father didn't even know these meetings existed. For him, it was a banking miracle that they were always given extensions when other businesses were closing. I opened my laptop and looked at the documents I had saved. The hardware store, Herramientas Gabriel, had been in the red for 3 years. My father, an excellent salesman but a terrible administrator, had accumulated debts that he paid with more debts. My silent intervention had been the only thing keeping the business afloat. The loan renewal letter was ready on my desk. I just needed to print it, sign it as an authorized consultant, a title I had invented and the bank had accepted without question thanks to my friend, and send it. My phone vibrated. A message from my cousin Lucia. Your parents are saying you left because you got a job in another city. Is it true? Are you okay? Typical of my mother to create a story that made her look good in front of the family. The truth was too shameful. She had thrown her unemployed son out on the street because she couldn't stand to see him doing nothing while he secretly saved the family business. I looked at the renewal letter again. A dark thought crossed my mind. What would happen if I didn't send it this time? For years, I had been the invisible support of my family. When I graduated from college with honors in business administration, my mother commented that it was the least I could do after all they had spent on me. When I got my first important job, she insinuated that I probably knew someone. Every achievement minimized, every effort belittled. Meanwhile, every 2 weeks, I silently transferred money to the business account to cover the gaps my father didn't see, contacted suppliers pretending to be him to get better prices, reviewed the accounting books that my mother, proud of her accounting degree that she never used professionally, kept carelessly. The letter was still on my desk, staring at me, judging me. If you have any dignity, you should leave. My mother's words echoed in my head. Dignity, that word she used as a weapon, but whose real meaning she seemed to ignore. I closed my laptop. The letter remained unsent. The days passed. I focused on looking for work, aware that my savings wouldn't last forever. I got a few interviews, including a promising one for a consulting firm that valued my previous experience. Every night before bed, I wondered if I should warn them about the loan. Every morning, I remembered my father's look as my mother yelled at me, and I decided to wait one more day. Exactly 2 weeks after my departure, the phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello, son. His voice sounded tense, almost unrecognizable. I need to talk to you. It's about the business. What's wrong, Dad? A long, painful silence. I could imagine my father running his hand through his hair, as he always did when he was nervous. The bank called this morning. The loan, the main loan, wasn't renewed. They say it was due 3 days ago and they never received the renewal request. Another silence. This time it was me who didn't answer. They're giving us a week to pay the full amount or we'll lose the premises. His voice broke. I don't understand what happened. Every year it's renewed automatically. Nothing is renewed automatically, Dad. I know, but it always worked out somehow. I always worked it out, Dad. The silence that followed was so dense I could almost touch it. You. His voice was now barely a whisper. Yes, me. The parasite who only comes to take advantage of you. Son, your mother was upset. She didn't mean. Yes, she did. And you let her say it. I heard him take a breath, as if preparing for a confession. I knew you were helping with the accounts. I didn't know about the loan, but I noticed you were reviewing the books. I never said anything. Why? Because it was convenient. I completed his sentence. Because as long as I fixed it, you didn't have to face the disaster or face Mom. I'm sorry, he murmured. Please, son, can you help us? If we lose the business, we'll have nothing. It's all we have. I looked out the window of my small apartment at the city that continued its rhythm, indifferent to our family dramas. I thought you were taking advantage of me, I finally replied, the words coming out like stones from my mouth. From the window of my car, I observed the hardware store, Herramientas Gabriel. The sign that my father had painted with so much pride 20 years ago now looked faded. At the entrance, a yellow sign announced total liquidation, everything must go. A month had passed since that desperate call from my father, and just as I had foreseen, without my silent intervention, everything was falling apart. I didn't feel joy, only a strange emptiness, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. My phone vibrated. It was a message from my mother. Please come home. We need to talk. It was the 10th similar message in 2 weeks. At first, they had been demanding, then pleading, now simply desperate. After my father's call, I had decided to stay away. Not out of revenge, I told myself, but out of necessity. Some lessons are only learned when you hit rock bottom. I parked in front of my parents' house. The garden, my mother's pride, showed signs of neglect. The curtains were closed, unusual for a sunny afternoon. I took a deep breath before knocking on the door. It was my father who opened it. Gabriel seemed to have aged 10 years in a month. His shoulders, always straight and proud, were now slumped under the weight of the reality he had avoided for so long. "Son," he said hoarsely, "thank you for coming." I followed him to the living room. My mother was sitting on the sofa with a cup of cold tea in her hands. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "The bank gave us the final ultimatum," my father began without preamble. "If we don't pay in 3 days, they'll seize the premises and everything in it. We've tried to sell what we can," my mother continued, in a voice I didn't recognize. It was no longer the authoritarian and critical voice I remembered. It sounded small, fragile, but no one wants to pay what it's worth. "And what do you expect me to do?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. My mother put the cup on the table with a thud. "We know everything," she said, looking directly at me. "Your father finally told me what you've been doing all these years. The loans, the renegotiations, the money you were transferring." It took me a while to convince her, my father intervened. She didn't want to believe that her son, whom she accused of doing nothing, was the one keeping the family business afloat. While you treated me like a burden," I completed. My mother got up and walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman worn down by pride and fear. "You were always better than us," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Smarter, more capable. When you came home after losing your job, I was secretly happy. Finally, there was something you had failed at, something that put you on our level." She turned around. Tears streamed freely down her face. I was jealous of my own son. What kind of mother does that? The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. It wasn't charged with tension or resentment, but with a painful truth finally exposed to the light. My father approached me with a stack of papers. "These are all the business documents. The contracts, the loans, everything. I always kept them in order, as you taught me. Even though I never gave you credit for it." I took the papers and reviewed them briefly. The situation was worse than I imagined. The debt had grown exponentially in my absence. "And I watched as you lost everything I had silently sustained," I murmured, almost to myself. "We failed you," my father said, sitting heavily in the armchair. "I failed you. Every time your mother unfairly criticized you, I remained silent. Every time she devalued your accomplishments, I nodded out of cowardice, out of comfort." I looked at the documents again. A part of me wanted to let them suffer the consequences to the end. Another part remembered the 5-year-old boy whom my father taught to use a screwdriver, the mother who, despite her criticisms, had stayed up all night when I had a fever at 12. "I can't save the business," I said finally. "It's gone too far. But I can help you sell it so you don't lose everything." A month later, Herramientas Gabriel had new owners. I had managed to negotiate a deal that, while not making my parents rich, allowed them to pay off all their debts and keep a small fund to start over. My parents had to sell the house and move to a modest apartment. My mother, at 58, got a job as an accountant in a small company where she could actually apply the degree she had earned so many years ago. My father reluctantly agreed to work as a salesman in another hardware store. As for me, I accepted the job at the consulting firm. It turned out to be better than I expected. My experience saving a family business on the brink of bankruptcy, now openly acknowledged on my resume, was seen as a valuable asset. I visited my parents every 2 weeks. Our conversations were no longer laden with unspoken expectations or accumulated resentment. They were conversations between adults who finally saw each other as they were, imperfect, sometimes selfish, but capable of change. One night, while we were having dinner in their new apartment, my mother took my hand. "I never thanked you," she said simply. "I didn't do it for thanks," I replied. "I know. You did it because you love us, despite everything." My father nodded, his eyes shining. "Sometimes," I said, carefully choosing my words, "loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their actions." I couldn't save the business, but maybe I saved something more important. All three of us knew it was true. We had lost a hardware store, but for the first time in a long time, we were finding a family. Silent love goes unnoticed until it ceases to exist. The strongest families are not those without conflict, but those that learn to rebuild after hitting rock bottom. Remember, dignity is not in never falling, but in how you decide to get up.